Hi there, you're listening to NPR's Book of the Day. I'm Alyssa Nadworny. Exiled Russian journalist Mikhail Zygar now lives in New York after fleeing Russia in 2022. A court there sentenced him in absentia to 8.5 years in prison after he spoke out about the war in Ukraine. In his latest book, The Dark Side of the Earth, he says the Soviet Union's collapse wasn't a victory for democracy, and that many unresolved issues led to the world order we have now. He tells NPR's Nick Spicer how the history of Russia helps explain the forces shaping moves by President Vladimir Putin today.
This message comes from Progressive Insurance. Insurance isn't one size fits all. That's why drivers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years now. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they'll show you options that fit your budget. So whether you're picking out your first policy or just looking for something that works better for you and your family, they make it easy to see your options. Visit Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
This message comes from Sony Pictures Classics with I Swear, a 3-time BAFTA winner, starring Robert Aramayo in the true story of John Davidson, navigating life with Tourette's in 1980s Britain while fighting for understanding. Now playing only in theaters. Support for NPR and the following message come from Warby Parker, the one-stop shop for all your vision needs. They offer expertly crafted prescription eyewear, plus contacts, eye exams, and more. For everything you need to see, visit your nearest Warby Parker store or head to warbyparker.com.
In my book, I cover 30 years. I start with the early 60s, the moment when the first man goes to space, Yuri Gagarin, and that's the highest peak of the Soviet civilization. And only in 30 years after that, Soviet Union collapses. So it takes 30 years for the country to disappear. And I think what was really important, the Soviet Union started collapsing decades before 1991, because a lot of people in the Soviet Union stopped believing in any possibility of any bright future for Soviet Union. They stopped believing in communism. And in the late 80s, they saw a different perspective. They started believing that democratic Russia was possible. So I think that psychological dimension was really important. And it's the most important approach in my book.
So sort of a crisis of faith, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
One of the big changes in the late 80s and 90s, you described that moment so well at the end of the Cold War when everything seemed to be opening up, reform, new freedoms, McDonald's, near Red Square. I remember visiting that, and a sense that history had turned, but you argued that it had not. Why not?
We see now that the world today looks like not as if Democrats had prevailed back in the 90s, but on the contrary. And today's Russian President Vladimir Putin shares the same rhetorics as the old hardcore conservatives used to have in the late years of the Soviet Union. So indeed, Russia today looks like the country where the coup of 1991, the coup attempt against Gorbachev, had actually prevailed. And somehow the Western ideas, not the Western military forces, but the ideas, democracy became so popular and so fashionable. It was completely unacceptable to remain dictator, not only for old communist bosses, but for a lot of other former dictators. And now we see that we are living through the opposite trend. We see that liberal democracy seems to be like old and outdated and naive ideology, and a lot of people seem not to believe in it.
Why not? And where?
I'm afraid there are a lot of people in the United States who don't really believe, and quite a lot of people in Europe. I'm happy that we are talking to you a few days right after the election in Hungary. That shows us that it's still a complicated picture.
And tell me, how does that inform the decisions that Vladimir Putin is taking in Russia and on the global stage?
The worst thing that happened to Vladimir Putin during the last years is that he realized that he does not understand the new generations of Russians because they don't share his Soviet cultural code. They less and less seem to worship the great empire. They are not that different from other people who were born and raised with iPhones in their pockets in Europe or in the West. So Putin needs to re-educate all those people. He needs to bring Soviet Union back. He needs to bring Soviet values back. He needed to relaunch that repressive apparatus and the atmosphere of fear in the country. So I'm still convinced that this war in Ukraine is also the war for Russia, not only for Ukraine. It's the war to make young Russians obey the dictator.
So, from having read your book, it's fascinating read, fascinating look at Soviet history as seen from Moscow, from different points of the Soviet Empire at the time. You've interviewed a lot of high-level people. What is the sort of resonance for a Western reader now, somebody who picks up your book in the United States? Are there, you're doing history, but it does have contemporary echoes. What is the sort of takeaway for somebody living in the here and now today?
I'm afraid to say that I see some parallels, because definitely an almighty empire that Soviet Union used to be and the almighty empire of the United States of America have something in common. And I think it will be really important for some people in America to read this, to see some obvious trends that were happening in the Soviet Union and how that empire came to its end. And one of the most important reasons, as I've already mentioned, was the crisis of faith, crisis of confidence. The fact that for all Soviet people, the communist ideology was completely outdated and no one believed in it. So basically, yes, I think liberal democracy, as it is the cornerstone ideology of the United States, is crucial. And cynicism, which is becoming more and more influential in many countries of the world, is that kind of disease. So I think that's to find some unexpected parallels between historic figures. Because I think unexpectedly, when I was writing about Mikhail Gorbachev, for example, I found that he historically, in a way, looks like former President Barack Obama, or first Russian President Boris Yeltsin, in a way, reminded me of Donald Trump.
And just to look forward for your country and the Russians who may be looking back on their history and imagining the future, do you feel hopeful for your country? Is there going to be a moment where freedom and democracy come to the country?
First, I do think that the end of the Putin's empire is inevitable. And I think it's from historical point of view, it's more or less obvious that the concept of Russia as an empire is doomed. So Russia won't be able to remain that aggressive empire as it's trying to be. So I'm more or less confident that it will be very different from what we see now in 20 years. It's harder to predict the future of democracy because it depends on the rest of the world as well. I wish that democratic ideas in Russia could prevail, and I think it's possible. It's really possible because, unfortunately, tragically, the leader of Russian opposition, Alexei Navalny, was murdered in Russian prison 2 years ago. But still, he is clearly going to be seen by future generations of Russians as some kind of Russian messiah, the heroic leader who gave his life for democratic values, for the idea that Russia can be democracy. And I think that's a very powerful message. When a person sacrifices his life for his belief in democracy, that's very impactful. That can really change the way how the future generations would see their own future.
A hero to remember then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mikhail Zygar is the author of Dark Side of the Earth. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Nick.
And just a quick reminder that signing up for Book of the Day Plus is a great way to support NPR's book coverage and public media. And you'll get to listen to every episode sponsor-free. So please go find out more at plus.npr.org/Book of the Day.
This message comes from Rosetta Stone. Spring travel coming up? Rosetta Stone has been the trusted leader in language learning for over 30 years. Ready to start learning a new language this spring? Visit rosettastone.com/NPR today.
This year, for the first time in NPR's history, public media is operating without federal funding. That means NPR needs your support now more than ever. I'm Brittany Luce from It's Been a Minute. Please do your part to keep independent, reliable news coverage strong and support the podcasts that get you through the day by making a gift for Public Media Giving Days. Head over to donate.npr.org.